Now let's talk about the Christmas story for a little bit. As I said earlier, St. John doesn't have a Christmas story in his gospel. He just starts out with the words, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." But the Christmas story is actually in Luke's gospel and in Matthew's gospel. And you know the story in Luke's gospel. It goes, it starts out with Mary finding out that she's pregnant after Zechariah and Elizabeth are pregnant. The angel Gabriel comes to her. And then Caesar Augustus proclaims a census that all the world should be taxed. And so Joseph and Mary go down to Bethlehem because Joseph is of the house and lineage of David, and Mary is going to have the baby there. She gives birth to the baby Jesus, wraps him in swaddling clothes, and lays him in a manger because there's no room for them in the inn. And in the meantime, there are shepherds out in the field. You know the whole story, and the angels come out. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. And then the shepherds come and worship the baby Jesus, and all this nice and Christmassy and all that cool stuff. Matthew's story is a little bit different. Matthew's story starts with Joseph, and Joseph is contemplating divorcing Mary, calling off the wedding, because she's pregnant, and they haven't had the marriage yet, and so he doesn't know what to do. So the angel Gabriel comes to him in a vision, in a dream, and says, "Don't be afraid to get married to Mary, because she's bearing the Christ." And so he gets up in the morning, they get married, and she has the baby, which is Jesus. Then in chapter 2 of Matthew's Gospel, the wise men come. They've been following the star, and they get to Jerusalem, and for whatever reason they lose sight of the star. So they go to King Herod, who is the king of Judea, which is the southern part of what we would call Israel these days. He's the king there. They go to Jerusalem to try to find out where the baby's going to be born. Well, Herod gets all upset because basically he's paranoid. He's a murderous, nasty, nasty guy, and he's paranoid. But he doesn't want to let on that he's paranoid and that he's upset by all this. So he calls his scholars, his scribes, and they search the scriptures and they say, well, we think it's going to be in Bethlehem because there's a prophecy about that. In Bethlehem, Ephrathah, those small among the tribes, the one who will be born among you will be great. So he sends the wise men off to Bethlehem with this promise to come back and tell them where he found the child, because he wants to go and worship him also. So the wise men come, they find Mary and Joseph, and the baby Jesus is there, and they worship him. They bring him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh, and we know all about that. And then, as the wise men are getting ready to leave after they're done with their visit, the angel returns to them and says, "Don't go back to Herod, but go back home another way that I'll show you, because Herod is looking to kill the child." So the wise men get up and they leave, go home another route. In the meantime, the angel appears to Joseph again and says, "Take Mary and the baby and flee to Egypt, because Herod is looking to kill the baby." So Joseph and Mary pack up in the middle of the night and they flee down to Egypt, crossing the Nile River like the people of Israel did many, many centuries before. So now the wise men are gone, Joseph and Mary have fled to Egypt, and Herod waits for a little bit and he realizes the wise men aren't coming back, and he flies into a murderous rage. And he knows that they've looked for the baby in Bethlehem, so he instructs his soldiers to go down to Bethlehem and some of the surrounding villages and just slaughter all the infants, all the baby boys who are under 2 years old. Just kill them all. So they go down there, they kill all the baby boys who are under 2 years old. While Joseph and Mary and Jesus are across the Nile River hiding out in Egypt. Now, there's a couple things about that. First of all, Matthew is very careful to say there are several prophecies about all of this, several times in the Old Testament. Back here, when they were talking about the woman's seed of Israel, there were several times in this when they were talking about this, Mary, and the woman who was going to have this child Jesus, and how this all was going to happen. So there's a prophecy that said that, that they would flee to Egypt, because there was one that said, out of Egypt I have called my son. There's another one that said, I'm trying to get them in the right order. There's one that said, out of Egypt I have called my son. There's another one that predicted the slaughter of the infants, because it said there a voice was heard in Ramah, Rachel weeping for her children, and she would not be comforted. And then there's a third one that said when Mary and Joseph got back from Egypt, they didn't go to Bethlehem, they went up to Nazareth, and the prophecy was he should be called a Nazarene. All right. Well, here's the part. Okay, so those are part of this deal here, the woman's seed of Israel. Okay. Well, here's what also was going on too. Joseph and Mary are down in Egypt, and they stay down there until they hear that Herod dies. Now when they come, so then they decide it's okay to go back to their homeland. So they head back, but Joseph, instead of going back to Bethlehem, they head up north to Nazareth, which, you know, it doesn't seem like it's so unusual because it's their hometown anyway, and they settle up there in Nazareth. Okay, but what Matthew says is not that they settled in Nazareth because that's where they came from, but they settled in Nazareth because Herod's son took over the throne in the kingdom of Judea down in the southern part. Herod's son took over the throne after Herod died. So it still probably wasn't safe for them to go back to Bethlehem, because even though Herod was dead, his son was still the ruler there, and there might be some residual animosity there. So because it's not safe to settle in Bethlehem, they go to Nazareth, which was hometown anyway, but that little detail kind of gets covered up. So anyway, they end up in Nazareth. Well, here's what's going on. The words of the Lord in Revelation, the story in Revelation goes like this. So you have the serpent, the dragon, the serpent in Revelation. He's waiting for the woman to deliver her seed, the pregnant woman, to deliver the child so that he can devour it right away. That's how it comes out in Revelation. And what happens in Revelation 12 is the woman gives birth to the child, who's immediately snatched up to God. And there's a sense in which we want to understand this whole idea of being snatched up to God as St. John's ultimate distillation of everything that's happened so far. All of this is distilled, like here.